Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hoard of Tales. My name is Aida. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a Latina woman of color. I have tan skin, dark eyes, dark hair. I am wearing an orange turtleneck, and my hair is cooperating today. And I am here in a very special edition of our Creator Talk series where we usually talk to amazing and talented TTRPG creatives. But this time we're focusing on the amazing women and femme talent that we have here in our own backyard. And I'd like to introduce you to someone very special who I've gotten to know as V, but you might know her better as Virginia Garcia McShannock. Who are you?
Hi, I'm V. You may have also seen me floating around as Virginia Garcia McShannock or Virginia Page before I was married. So I'm in a lot of things as that. And I am a graphic designer in the TTRPG space, as well as like a million other things, depending on what day of the week it is. My pronouns are she, her. I have very, very lightly tan skin, short dark hair, dark eyes. And I'm really excited to get to nerd out and talk about things that I do in TTRPGs here.
There are a lot of things that you have done in TTRPGs,
Too many.
and I promise I would list some of them. You are, I think, among your very long CV of list of achievements, you were an assistant project manager at Modifius.
Yes.
You have your name on really big titles such as the Fallout RPG, such as Star Trek Adventured, Dishonored. You've worked on Sina Una,
I
who's
have,
an
yeah.
amazingly popular Kickstarter-based Philippine lore for D&D and such. Um, oh my goodness, is there any other big thing or even small thing that you've done recently that I'm missing?
I think that's most of the stuff that I worked on when I was in Modifius in some capacity. I also did the Homeworld RPG while I was there.
Yes, that's
Um,
great.
I have in the last year or so worked on some stuff with Soul Muppet Publishing for Orbital Blues. I did layout for a bunch of their adventures, which was super fun. Um, got so many things that even I forget what it is until I have to go update my portfolio, and then I'm like, oh, that project's missing. Oh, there's like 6 I haven't put on here. So many things, and I'm very, very lucky that I get to work and have gotten to work on some really awesome projects and IPs and with some great people. So
Absolutely. And when I mentioned you're homegrown, you are based in the UK.
I am, yes, I'm based out of London. So not really the place in the UK I think that everyone thinks of as like the game center of the UK, which is normally like Nottingham, where all the people are making board games and war games and video games and stuff. But yeah.
But there is like indeed a center or centers of gaming, centers of creativity in the UK and across Europe as
Oh,
well.
yeah, I mean the UK, there are huge places. One of the other many things that I do is help out. I say help out. I help run something called the Roleplay Haven, which
Mhm.
is a charity focused um collection of RPG clubs that we run, and we've got like 4 in London. There's 2 in Wales, 1 in Scotland. We have one in Liverpool opening up soon, and hopefully many more. So there's a lot of kind of huge bastions of TTRPG nerds across the UK, and these small little patches that maybe just don't get as much of attention as some other places like the US. Um, that hopefully their voices get seen a lot more, which is happening as time goes on. But yeah, there's a lot of us here in the UK.
There is. I mean, I have a lot of friends in the UK and across Europe who are generally saying, yeah, if I want to play with my friends on stream, I have to start at midnight, start at what in the morning. Forget West Coast. If you want to have a career, you're usually considering working with the West Coast as well in the US, which
Yeah,
great, amazing people would love to one day dabble, but that's a reach for people on
it's
our
really
side, in our corner of the
hard.
world.
I think professionally as well, if you're trying to do RPG streaming professionally, either whether that's fundraising for charity or just being able to pay your casts, the pool of people that you can reach out to for anything that's super long term gets really difficult if you want to work with folks outside of the US, but then time zones don't
Time
match up
zones.
at all. um and I've had both. I've run professional games for folks that are based in US time zones only, the whole table, which means I'm starting at like 11 p.m in the evening, 12 p.m at night. 12 a.m. in the morning, whichever way you want to think about it. But you know, I've also played in games with friends that don't start until those kind of times. Or, you know, at least in the UK, when I was streaming on Twitch, just video game stuff, you know, I was starting my streams at like 7, 8 o'clock to hit the folks in the US that I knew were the majority of the people watching my stream. So more stuff that is UK and kind of Europe time zone friendly is always a bonus.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you don't often get to interact with people within adjacent time zones or more accessible time zones
Not
as much as
not
you'd like, maybe?
Yeah, not quite as much as I'd like. I mean, in terms of my work, I work with a lot of people who are in the US. And most of the time I will do work at like somewhere between the hours of 9 to 5 my time, but sometimes I take meetings at what is for me ridiculous o'clock in the morning. But you know, I lived on an EST time schedule while being in the UK at one point for like a year and a bit solid, which confused all of my UK friends, but was really easy for work and stuff. So yeah, it's not so much a bother for me. I did several years of shift work and hospitality, so I no longer have a sleep pattern or a circadian rhythm that works. But I know that it can be kind of a pain, especially for time zones with really big gaps. Um, Not even just for scheduling meetings, but for like getting feedback and being able to not feel like I've sent a message that somebody then sees when they get up at 8 a.m. in the morning and they feel like they have to respond to. Because that's never good.
No, like you talk a lot about the professional challenges of having to work with
Mm.
people internationally for us as well, and how challenging it is also, or confusing for your community, for you to be on a different step in time as well, literally in that regard. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I, I,
I
I,
don't recommend living on EST if you're in the UK, because anyone who you have to interact with in daily life will be very confused for a long time about your trying to explain to people like, yeah, no, I'm up really late, but like I'm on the same time clock as you. I still get enough sleep and I'm still like awake for the same amount of hours. It's just different hours in the day.
You mentioned that you have the Roleplay Haven, and I think in our earlier discussion we discussed how that is also a community for you, not just one that happens to be within your time zone and local, but one that has a higher calling, deeper meaning, something that gives
Yeah.
back. Why don't I'll let you talk a little bit about Roleplay Haven.
Yeah, so the Roleplay Haven is something that I feel very, very connected to in many ways, not just because I'm now one of the directors who helps run it, but it's actually kind of the one of the two things that got me into RPGs. The first thing was I watched a bunch of Critical Role while I was still working in hospitality managing restaurants. And so you have a lot of like weird time between shifts where there's not really enough to do anything, but you've got to fill your time somehow and watch that. And I spent far too long Googling how to play D&D by yourself. Um,
Oh,
and then not
oh,
realizing at the time
friend.
that that's kind of not how it worked. Although there's lots of really great solo games now, which I wish had been about then. Um, and then I came across, I think I was looking for like rule books on a website for a local game store in London. And I noticed that they had like the equivalent of like a poster board on the website for like clubs and places you could play all across London. And by chance, the Roleplay Haven was one that was closest to where I was living. So I clicked on it and they said, like, if you've never come before, send an email. So I sent an email, and I had horrible social anxiety. I didn't really go out. I didn't really talk to a lot of people. Um, and I was like, well, if I don't like it, if I just feel too anxious and everything's terrible, then I don't have to go again. But if I go once, I might like it and then I might stay. And like I don't know anyone there, so if an hour in I'm like, this isn't for me, I can just leave and like no one's gonna know.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not what happened. They were super friendly, super lovely. I showed up and it was a big bunch of awesome nerds that were role playing. Um, and it was really nice because in gaming spaces can be very male dominated, and that wasn't the case here either.
Oh,
Like the second
lovely.
GM I ever played with was another woman. And I've had women at most of the tables that I've played at the RP Haven, the few that I've played, because I very quickly became a forever GM by my own choice. But
It's definitely different when you decide to ascend to that role rather than being relegated into it, I feel.
yes, yeah. So yeah, it's kind of what started me off. The RP Haven is also to some degree how I got into RPGs as a career and a profession. So I always feel like I owe a lot to the Roleplay Haven and a lot to the folks who were there before me who had started it up. And so I feel very, very lucky that I'm in a position now where I get to be one of the directors that helps direct where RP Haven goes and helping it grow. Because it does a lot of great stuff, not just for the people that come to our clubs, but we raise money through role playing. So every time you come and roll dice at our tables and you're paying for that game session and paying for your membership, that money goes towards charities. All of our branches get to vote on their own charity that they want to support. They're usually local. My local branch supports a mental health charity called Mind. And I don't know if they still do, but they used to have like a little office center like 10 minutes down the road from us. So we knew that that money that's being given to charity is going into local communities. We also pay all of the venues that we're in, even the ones that tell us, but it's all for charity, you can have it for free. We like to pay them because we support those local venues, because all of our clubs are kind of in person. So supporting the local venues is good because it keeps those spaces open, and a lot of them, are pubs or community centers or game stores. So we're hoping that we help keep them in business too, so they can keep providing cool things for the local community. And then money that doesn't go towards the general running of any company or business that you have, like websites and storage and insurance and things like that, that doesn't go directly to charity through donation, actually goes towards one of our charitable schemes, which is the Roll Together scheme, where we help people open up role-playing clubs in their areas. So we find a group of people that are like, hey, we want to open a club, or we're an existing club and we want to kind of join under your banner so we can use your resources and kind of do more together. We help them with that process. We help them find and pay for venues. We help them get players. We advertise their club. And the more clubs we can open, the more money we can raise for charity. And it's all kind of big and cyclical. And it's been working for 10 years, over 10 years now. I think we founded in 2010, which was before I was there. But it's been really cool to see. I think we've raised a bit over £17,000 in that time
Fantastic.
for charity. And obviously we've opened, I don't know, it started with one club. We're now 4 in London, 2 in Wales, 1 in Scotland, and I think by the time that people see this, we should have our Liverpool branch open as well.
Sweet.
So it's whatever we're doing, it's working, and it's more people coming together to play games, having access to that, and more money for charity, which is always really good.
So it sounds definitely that having a local, accessible representative, as in you saw yourself, you saw other women, you saw other femme people there, was really formative for you, not just not just as you as a person, but professionally.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, seeing everyone at the Roleplay Haven's a volunteer, so none of us get paid. We have like, I want to say 48 to 50 people now across branch committees, the people who sit on the operating board of directors, all of the people in between that help manage various bits of the Roleplay Haven. But I think what was really cool is that I've always loved video games. And then I came into TTRPGs, watching Critical Role, which has women on it. And then seeing in an actual real life space when I go into somewhere that there are also women playing at tables. Because I think it's very easy to see online when you look at things, a lot of diversity in the TTRPG space, which is what you do see if you have a look on online communities. That's not always the same when you go to in-person communities for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, that's like where the trope comes of the older cishet white men playing first edition. Nothing wrong with it if that's a jam, but playing in the basement and not necessarily being very welcome. There's a trope. It's not necessarily true, but there is some seed about the origin of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get to any kind of stereotype like that, it's born out of something, which isn't always true. I think there are a lot of other clubs as well across the UK who aren't roleplay haven clubs that have great diversity and have a lot of women and people of color playing at their tables. But I think as a woman in those spaces, I was used to seeing spaces for gaming specifically very male dominated. So seeing it online that like, oh, there are other women that do this, and then going to the roleplay haven and seeing other women there, there's an element of not being surprised, but being like, oh, I know that I'm safe in this environment
Mm-hmm.
because if other women are here, that means that they must be safe and comfortable in this environment. And it's a thing I've always found. Is that if I see people like me in spaces, then I know that space is somewhere that I'm probably going to be comfortable. Whereas if I walk into a space and there's nobody like me in terms of, no other women, no other people of color, nobody that shares my kind of values or my viewpoint, then I'm like, am I in the right space? Is this
Mm-hmm.
place going to be welcoming for me? Because everybody is so different from I am. Um, And a lot of the time, the answer is yes, it probably is. And sometimes you have to go into those spaces in order for them to open up more. But I've been very lucky in that regard with when I found the roleplay haven that our mission is fun, safe charity gaming, and it seems like from everything we get told from the folks who join us that that's how they feel, which is what I hope is something that we can just keep spreading, and I hope it's something that more spaces have in the element of fun, safe gaming.
I am so happy that has been your experience. Thank you for sharing that, for saying that. And I'm so happy that something you're contributing to is providing that space for other people, especially women, people who want to see themselves. That I know people who have had the horror stories and people who have not had the horror stories. And whether it's horror story or not, something that really pulls at my heartstrings often is when we Hoard of Tales organize these kind of events. The participants later come saying like, "Wow, this is the first time I've played at a table where I wasn't the only woman or femme, or this is the first time I've played with an all women or all femme table at all." And something's just different. I feel seen. We don't have to explain or justify or be overly polite or code switch to not bother anyone else. Or we can just be who we are because certain communities, we have the values plastered right at the door and you know what kind of space it's going to be. And there are amazing other communities beyond ours online as well that have these spaces. And you and I get to luckily thrive and enjoy them. But as gung ho and as loud and as happy as we are, there's a lot of people who don't get that opportunity yet.
Yet. But
Yet.
hopefully, the more people that talk about those kind of things and offer those spaces, the more those people who haven't had that experience yet will get access to them, hopefully. But I think there's something to be said as well about getting to, I have a lot of friends who and other professionals that I work with who are male in the RPG space. Your very typical cishet white male, who I'm very grateful are the kind of people that champion my work and have always treated me as an equal in terms of what I'm capable of. They've never seen my gender or my background as something lesser than the next person along. But I think there's something lovely about playing games with people when you have that shared experience. Much
Hmm.
like when you play games with your friends, you've all had a shared experience with your friendship and things that you can reference and things that you've experienced together that make that game more fun. I think the same is true for women and women of color when we get to play together. We kind of have a shared lived experience for how we view the world and how the world views us, which means that you get an experience at that table with characters and things that come out in the story that you don't necessarily get at tables when you're the only woman or the only woman of color at that table. And that's kind of what I think is really different between being around people like who share those kind of values and lived experience versus just playing with anyone, no matter how great they may be.
Absolutely. 100%, million times agree. You get all the points if this was a game show. A lot of things you were saying about how the shared experience really comes out in storytelling, and that is indeed a key point about TTRPGs, RPGs in general, versus sort of static video games, for example. Is that what you think that makes TTRPGs and role-playing games so attractive to communities that hold like these kind of values?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's gaming spaces are a place where you can join up with other people who have the same values as you, who have the same interests, who maybe do have that shared experience, and you can enjoy that together. Because I think everyone puts a bit of themselves into characters or a little bit of themselves into the stories that they play out at a table. Um, and it's also nice because you can meet people from completely different backgrounds who have different values, and there is a level of exchange when you meet those people between sharing what you bring forth and what they bring forth and coming away from that changed, hopefully for the better and for good things. um, so I think role playing attracts people that are kind of curious about those things. They form communities. You form around the things that you know and you value, and you want to find other people who do as well. I think that's just natural, how people naturally find human connection. And TTRPGs inherently have a lot of human connection, regardless of whether you're playing something super narrative based or you just want to crunch mechanics with people. You're finding people who are like you that you can enjoy a thing together with, um, which, everyone has their preferences for which spaces they do that in. Video games, the art community, um, you know, sports. It's just people finding like-minded people, because that's how people naturally kind of congregate together.
And I think it's particularly great when people see themselves in that story building narrative, especially as we're bringing more women, well, not we specifically, but as more women are like becoming more profiled, having more executive positions and decision making power to get to highlight those stories, and people of color bringing in non European centric views as well. I mean, it took many years before I wasn't playing in a game that wasn't, you know, typical, how to say, Lord of the Rings or like
Your Western Anglo
Freudian,
fantasy tropes, yeah.
this basically. And before I was like, no, I get to put in parts of my heritage to see other people's heritages in there that aren't Western centric. I get to see worlds where things underground are not necessarily, evil or bad or dark skinned even, ew, but something beautiful, something reverent, some this narrative gets flipped and you get to see other perspectives. And you get to see now as a storyteller myself at the table, player and GM was like, I'm going to have a lot of buff, strong women. They're going to be all different shapes and sizes, heights. They're going to be hugging. They're going to be maybe sharing some soft little kisses here and there with consent. And we're going to enjoy this story.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I ran a D&D game that was supposed to be like a horror game. It was an old 2e Ravenloft module that I'd put into 5e and, done some work on. And I had two female players join me kind of midway through that game. This was a game at the Roleplay Haven. And, it's a horrible fantasy setting that, of course, my players have turned into a horror comedy instead of anything serious. And for some short backstory to make this make sense, they had a paladin who had a sock puppet, and some stuff had happened, and the sock puppet had become sentient and grafted to his arm, and it was constantly whispering for him to do terrible things, just the absolute most heinous stuff, because it had lived in the deep dark forever and had finally been awoken. Um, and none of the players noticed this. They just thought their paladin was just being weird, like he usually was. And then one night they decided to have like a pub episode where they all got really drunk. That was what they wanted to do in the middle of a horror setting. And I was like, you know what? Why not? We're already off the rails here. Let's go with it. The paladin gets drunk and passes out, but the sock puppet is still fine. And so these two female player characters at this table, played by women, had a whole conversation with the sock puppet about it's okay if that you want to do all of these weird things. So, that's fine. But like if you're gonna do some of it, you do have to ask for consent. Like, if you're just gonna randomly try and see what the halfling, tastes like by nibbling on his finger, that's fine, but you have to ask him before you can do it. You have to check he's okay. And, they did this wonderful thing where they just role played having this conversation with him. Like, we're not gonna judge you for the things you want to do because you've been trapped in darkness for a millennia and it's a whole brand new world. But you have to check with people first before you try and eat them. That's not okay. You can't just do that randomly. You can't steal people's things either. Just ask them to borrow it. And kind of gave it a whole lesson on consent and how to be respectful to women that was totally on brand for what this awful sock puppet was as a kind of NPC PC character. But everyone at that table, including the guys I was playing with, thought this was brilliant and were like, this is great. And I look at it and I'm thinking that's only the kind of weird fun that you could have at a table if you have women who have this kind of experience. And everybody loved it. It was so weird to have in the middle of a horror game, but the scene itself was just so funny and so true and with such a great message. And it's why I love having women at the tables for things. You know, especially also seeing girl math in D&D is my favorite. You know, or any other tabletop game. This one just happened to be D&D, but it was brilliant. And we never would have had that really funny scene had I not had two female players at the table. So
consent matters. Safety above all things.
You're not far off. One of the player playing the paladin did turn up with a sock puppet once. He didn't tell me about
Had to
this.
have.
He just decided in a session that he had a sock puppet because before it was evil. He was a paladin, but he was also a performer. I don't know how that worked.
Did the player bring us a spare sock in eventually?
They bought a rainbow sock. They glued eyes to it.
Perfect.
And at one point, I think it was after I'd made it sentient, it was called, he had two of them called Bert and Ernie.
Okay.
Based off of the Muppets. And midway through a session one day, like I was doing a back and forth with him as the sock puppet, and he didn't tell me, he just produced it from under the table.
Thank
and
you.
I laughed for a solid 5 minutes. Rich, if you ever see this, you know what you did.
Thank you, Rich.
But the sock puppet, yeah. Just when my players bring props to things and they don't tell me they're bringing props, it's usually the most ridiculous thing ever. And I think the sock puppet is top of that list of things players have turned up to tables I'm at with.
I mean, that's fantastic. And the role-playing games, they're fantastical games, and we put a lot of ourselves into them. And a lot of it is what we want the world to be, because in the stories, we have the power to change the world. Depending on the mechanics, we have the godly powers. In D&D, you eventually, you're universe changing beings. And so for the characters to take command and change the narrative, rather ensure a narrative that continued with safety and consent and communication, reflects a lot about how we wish we can change things in the real world. And whether we can or cannot, it feels good to say we had control, we had agency, and we actually changed something and change the outlook of a sock puppet from here on out.
Yeah, I mean, I think another example I can think of that of like players completely reshaping the narrative and really putting something of themselves into it. I ran a stream way back in the day for Encounter Roleplay that was Judge Dredd. I got asked by a friend if I'd run it. I was like, I don't know anything about Judge Dredd except for what I've seen on the movies and general pop culture. And they were like, you'll be fine. It was a sponsored stream, so I was absolutely shitting it, being like, oh, I really hope I don't mess this up. And I built out this thing of like, you are the judges. You have been sent to the worst mega block in the city. Like, the judges don't even like to come here. The ones that had a little station here, it's all gone. They haven't been back in years. The whole thing is controlled, by several kind of factions or gangs within the block. And it kind of works because everyone kind of relies on them. So they're not necessarily bad guys. They're people doing things in a difficult situation. There's whole sections of this place that are like have never been out of lockdown because something malfunctioned and no one will come in here to fix it. And they're judges. Judge Dredd is a very violent, I think, movie when you think about it. The judges themselves are meant to be kind of violent and actiony. And I have never been prouder nor more confused by a group of players who had absolute power at their fingertips and went, the first thing we're going to do after we, carve out a new little base for ourselves. We're opening a soup kitchen. And I'm like, this is Judge Dredd, you know, the thing where you're expected to kind of kick down doors and take out bad guys. They're like, we're opening a soup kitchen. Because if we do that, we can get food to all the residents and they don't have to rely on these other factions within here that are kind of helping them because they feed them, but also it's all transactionary and it cause and effect. And that way we can get help to people and we can get to know them, and then we can take their reliance off of the bad people, and then we can deal with this issue from the systematic root of the problem. And I was like, this is not what I expected, but this
That's
is so much better
brilliant.
than anything I could have imagined. And, you know,
Exactly.
they kicked in some doors and beat up some bad guys at the appropriate points, and it all got really crazy towards the end. But the fact that that was their choice completely changed my plans for that game, because nowhere in my mind did I think anyone in Judge Dredd was going to be like, we as a group of judges were setting up a soup kitchen to deal with the problems in this mega block. But it was like, of course, that's the more sensible thing to do. It's just not, it's very subversive against the media that you're kind of running in, but it's great. And a lot of the players I had on that, I think the table was probably majority women on that one as
Mhm.
well. And it was just brilliant. But
And none of
it
that
was,
makes it any less fun than what the maybe the mainstream expectation was to be like center violence, center judgment, and center a heavy-handed approach. That approach that you explain that your players come up with is not any less fun. It makes it more nuanced, more complex. You get more political, and when you do want to whip out the heavy-handed punches and violence, it's more focused, it's more accurate, it's more
yeah.
laser pinpointed, which is much more satisfying.
But it was just seeing the players kind of come up with this as we were playing the game, because it wasn't, there was nothing decided beforehand about this. They were just like, I think this is what we should do, and we're like doing it as we were playing. You can just see that it's, you know, the thoughts behind, you know, the values that those people have is that actually I value games where we get to help people, and it's not always through the avenue of immediately beat the bad guys up.
Mhm.
There were definitely some people in that NPCs in that game that deserved all of the stuff they got against them. But like it was just really nice to see players being like, this is a thing I care about, and I want to make it a thing my character cares about, and I'm going to find a way to make that work in game. And even if it's kind of the polar opposite to what this system and what this world intends, I'm going to find a way to make it work. Which they did, because their whole reasoning was, if we do this, it actually makes our job easier. And it's a thing that to this day I still think about and laugh at, and I don't know how they came up with it, because it's just brilliant.
Good on them. I'm glad you've had such really interesting and fun players as well. Just to shift gears a little bit, we talked about some of your players and how they were exceptional players, players who do spend extra time and bring in props. A plus plus plus. Definitely do this. Your GM will thank you so much for it. Um, as a TTRPG professional yourself, and you said your earliest encounters were watching Critical Role, and of course, they were very much a kind of small operation, and they've grown and they've made a lot of pathways for other people to consider how to grow, how to be a professional, how to enter the community. Who are your TTRPG professional role models?
Oh, there are so many people I could put on this list for so many different reasons. Um, some just to I wrote some notes on some of these questions, because we talked about a few of these things before, because otherwise I forget, like everyone I've ever known disappears from my head. But one of the people that kind of stands out was when I first joined Modifius. When I went as a publishing assistant, and then I became an assistant project manager and project managed a ton of lines and stuff. One of the first people I ever worked with that wasn't like Modifius staff in the office was somebody called Jack Norris. And Jack has written on a ton of tabletop RPG things over the years, more than anything on my list, probably. And he's been doing it for a long time. And it's very scary, because I came into RPGs with no real background in making RPGs, no kind of formal background in writing or creative writing. And one of the first projects I worked on was John Carter, where I started out proofreading bits for the Kickstarter, and that very quickly turned into me developing the 3 supplement books that came out after the core, managing writers, line editing, writing briefs, all of these things that I was completely new to. And Jack has been doing this for years. He was one of the original lead developers on John Carter at the time. And, you know, very quickly he was handing stuff over to me. He was taking direction and red lines and briefs from somebody with not even, you know, a quarter of the experience that he had. And all he ever did throughout the entire thing was be really supportive of it. And, you know, if he knew I was new to something, he'd break it down. He never had an issue if I sent, you know, a draft back, because he was also a writer, with red lines of like, I think this could be this, or we should change that to that. And it was probably one of the best experiences I could have had coming into RPGs, was getting to work with somebody who was so knowledgeable, but also had no problem that this young 20-something-year-old woman with no experience was coming in to kind of help manage this thing that he'd been working on for ages. And instead gave me the opportunity to learn and grow. And ever since then, Jack and I have kept in contact since those days, and we still chat occasionally. He's recommended me for projects. I'm always very grateful for how he speaks about me to folks when he's recommended me. And I think that is, you know, I look up to that, because I want that to be the experience that hopefully I give other people who are brand new and that I end up working with, or people who are less experienced, that they feel the same. I don't ever want to judge somebody based on their experience, just because they're newer or just because they haven't done anything yet. And I look up to the attitude that he had in working with everybody that he worked with, which was always listening and taking in those ideas and helping and offering advice. And that goes for a lot of the folks that I worked with at Modiphius, like Jim Johnson, who deals with Star Trek stuff. Jim is wonderful and always has such a great focus on, when he's doing Star Trek, keeping inclusivity and safety and stuff in mind when building those products and working with his teams. I do a lot of proofreading for the Star Trek line, which I'm very happy about, because I get to read Star Trek and get paid for it. So, you know, is kind of always pushing for better and for more in those areas. And then you've just got folks whose work I really love. Lone Archivist is a graphic designer who does a ton of the stuff for Orbital Blues for Soul Muppet Publishing, and just comes up with the most gorgeous design work. I love looking at their work. You've got people like Kiana, who does incredible work in RPGs. I've been lucky to work with Kiana a couple of times on projects over the last few years. And they're always absolutely wonderful to work with. Most of them are friends of mine. My friend Don, who's a brilliant writer, editor, and game master, who I've hired for work. He's hired me for work. And there's too many people that I could name that I've been able to work with, or whose work I admire, that has in some way contributed to my experience, me being where I am, learning the things that I learn. But they're all role models, because they do great work and they have great values in making things accessible and open to people.
I'm thank you to all of these previous mentors for cheering her on, for letting her know that her voice and her perspectives and her energy and efforts mattered. And thanks for sharing that you came relatively inexperienced in those very specific
Oh,
fields.
completely inexperienced.
Because
Like,
I think anyone who was like, I don't know if it's for me, I don't know if I have what it takes, I don't have this training and that training. Ta-da!
yeah, people ask me all the time, like, what advice would you give for somebody like who wants to get into RPGs? How did you do it? And I'm like, it was a series of falling down a load of rabbit holes. Whether you're talking about how I got into RPGs at the beginning, or how I got into doing freelance graphic design at this point, it was just like I kind of fell into it. I had a reason to do the work, so I just kept doing the work, and more work kept appearing. You know, some kind of weird laws of attrition, in that by doing it, you generate it to come more to you, and it snowballed, and now I'm here. But yeah, I came into the industry with nothing more than having played RPGs for a good few years. And I'd never even thought of coming into it had it not been for my very good friend Gary, who's one of the other directors for the Roleplay Haven, being like, you would be good in games. And I was like,
Oh,
I work in hospitality. I manage restaurants. I mean, I like playing games, but I don't know how to make them. And he was like, no, I think you do good in games, and really pushed and actually helped me get the internship with Modiphius that then led to me getting a job with them, and now we're here. So if you're somebody who's like, I'd like to kind of do this, but I have no experience, just do it.
just
Whatever
do it.
doing it means to you, whether that's like you make your first thing and you put it out, or you write several dozen things that no one ever sees until you're ready to put something out. Like, nobody's first time creating something is going to be perfect. I think sometimes if you look at my list of works, it all looks really impressive because it's Fallout and it's John Carter and they're big IPs and it's a big company that I worked for. But I was guided when I started John Carter by all of these people who had so many more years of experience than me, looking over my work as a second set of eyes and going, well, what about this? When I didn't know how to write a brief, so I would ask somebody and they would go, well, here's one that I wrote and what's important to include. So, while it looks really impressive that I had no experience and then was doing all of this stuff, there's a lot of kind of hidden work from other people, mentors, people that help me behind that. And I definitely think there's a lot of those kind of people in the TTRPG space now who are very willing to give their time, to give their energy, and to share their knowledge. It's just not all of those spaces are immediately obvious to folks. But there are communities that focus on that. And I think most people who work in RPGs are quite willing to talk about those things, providing that you're kind of mindful of when you're asking them and what you're asking and how much kind of labor you're asking to put in, them to put in to answer your questions. But for example, I'm part of the Tabletop Industry Network, which is UK focused. They've got a Discord. And I have been for a while. I lurk in a lot of Discords because I don't know how to manage like 3 million notifications.
I understand.
And they've asked me to do a talk, which will have happened, I think, by the time folks see this, about the basics of layout and graphic design. And like, can you just talk to people about the basics? So there are spaces like that where community voices are sharing their knowledge. So I encourage folks to seek those out and just do whatever the thing is that you want to do and keep doing it and keep showing it to people. And that's the only any other advice I could give someone I think would be disingenuous if I was like, go get this degree and then write your CV like this, because that wasn't how I did it. So there are people that took that route and have backgrounds in creative writing or degrees in game design, equally as valid.
I think with that perspective and with that experience, we don't know them, but there might be some up and coming people who might say, "Oh, one of my inspirations, role models in TTRPGs is definitely Virginia for sure."
I'm not sure about that. It'd be lovely if that were the case. I have had a couple of people who I've worked with who have got daughters be like, I hope that my daughter sees someone like you in these kind of spaces and knows that that space is also for them. And that's always been really touching, that literally the couple of times I've been told that. Um, I'm not sure if I should be anybody's role model. And that's just me because I'm not a perfect person.
That's for them to decide.
Yeah. I think it's also, I have a thing about kind of making role models out of people can be very dangerous, especially in the online space, because parasocial relationships and pedestals, and which is a whole like other topic of things. But I certainly hope that if me being in the space and getting to talk about what I do, even though I'm terrible at, to actually talking about it on my own social medias, encourages somebody who is like me to be like, I could do that too. I can see myself in the space, or just even the comfort of knowing that, like, if they come into these spaces, they're not the only young woman of color in that space. They're not the only young woman who does XYZ or who is trying to do XYZ. And that makes them feel a bit more comfortable, which means that they can continue on their journey to end up wherever they end up at the end of that snowball. That would make me happy. Like, if me just talking about what I do gives somebody else the ability to feel a little bit more comfortable in the space, then I'm very happy with that.
I'm happy right here, right now, I have to say. When before I let you go, I did have one other question. So we are streaming this throughout the month where we have all these one shots, all these amazing GMs, and all these players. If time was a thing, you had all your ducks in a row, you were well slept, well nourished, and you had time to just think about, I would have hosted a one shot, or I would have played in any one shot if it was this. What would that be?
Oh, I think I'd probably be more likely to be running something than playing because
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy running more than playing, which is weird, and I don't think that's what most people usually say. But I love a good space horror game. So I would probably be running something like Mothership or like
Ooh,
Death in Space, because nothing is more badass than getting to have like a group of ladies in space dealing with horror. And like not like the in the horror movie, the awful trope of the woman who screams, trips, and falls over and everything's terrible, but like the way that women really deal with catastrophes, which is getting really badass and, you know, probably kicking the hell out of whatever weird gribbly alien I send their way to try and kill them.
lovely.
But yeah, I think running a space horror game with a bunch of women would be a really interesting experience. Um, Especially because I think women view what is horrible quite differently sometimes to people of other backgrounds. So
Absolutely.
it'd be really fun to try and play with some of the tropes of what, as women, we find horrific, and putting that into a story and narrative where they have the agency to like kick its ass
Hmm.
would be really cool.
I think one of my top games of that I've been at a table of all time, and I've played on a lot, and I love all of them for different reasons. But consistently, high mark has to be the Alien RPG.
It's so
uh,
fun.
Game I did with all femme, all women table as well. It was like we played the beginner story, Chariot of the Gods, across 8 episodes, less six, something like that. But my God, it was. We had a GM who was just master in like dramatic pauses,
Yeah.
master in like the skittering sounds, and just like me getting goosebumps, and like everyone is dying left and right. It was one of the best TTRPG we've ever had. Plus, I got to roll like 12 dice at a time because that's how the system works.
Yeah, it's a great system and a really fun game. There's something great about horror. As somebody I love when I play horror games with people to be like, here is a list of the things that I find like make my skin crawl and make me deeply uncomfortable and that I kind of hate. But in this fun environment with people I trust, I want you to use these
Mm.
against me as much as possible, and just make me feel awful in the most fun way. Kind of like when you watch a properly scary horror movie and you know it's going to scare the absolute shit out of you, and you're going to be like turning every light on in the house after you've watched it. But it's a really fun time when you let yourself be made uncomfortable in a safe way. Like
That's the
that kind of horror
difference.
game is 1,000% the thing that I want to run. I love playing in. It's just, oh,
I don't like horror movies. I had to actually watch the Alien movies. I happened to watch it before the game for the first time ever, and this was like last year, 2 years ago. So brand spanking new eyes about it. And the Alien RPG also have elements of PvP in them. There are players who are playing characters who have drastically opposing goals as your
yeah,
character, and all of that was fine. And even with all those hesitations I normally have, this was one of the best gaming experience because it was done in a safe, communicative place where I felt seen, I felt comfortable, and I was like, okay, let's just be dramatic partners, tell a goddamn good story, and see who survives.
yeah.
I
Did you
survived. I
survive?
survived. I survived. I was
Yeah.
the lone survivor.
I
Oh,
already know that I would not survive in the alien universe. I have a long running joke with a friend of mine that is, I would pet the xenomorph
oh.
because they were like, well, you wouldn't pet a xenomorph, would you? And I was like, well, if it's going to kill me anyway, why not go out petting it, right? And he was just like, why are you like this? And I'm like, look, the more it looks like it could viciously tear me apart, the cuter I think it is and the more I want to pet it. So I'm not trusted to be around weird, gribbly alien life forms in sci-fi games anymore because everyone's like, "We know what you're gonna do, V," and I'm like, I just want to pet it," and they're like, "It's gonna kill you." I'm like, "Be fine."
Interesting. We did have a rule, no romancing the xenomorph beforehand.
I'm not
Uh,
sure I'd romance the xenomorph.
like, do not wooify the xenomorph.
Yeah, I can understand that because you know that there's that one player that will give it a go, and quite frankly, I commend if you're that player, good on you. Even if it makes your GM's life a living hell dealing with a romance xenomorph, but like
I'm
if
going
you're
to
that
run the
brave person, just
kudos. I'm going to actually run the game at a convention later this year. I will report back into you personally if
oh
someone
yes,
tried
please.
shenanigans with the xenomorph. I don't know who those players are going to be. It's likely going to be an all-male table because you can't really control the way things happen at in-person conventions, which was my last experience too. But we'll see. Didn't have a negative one, but I was like, I am missing a certain energy in this room. This is why I curate the community spaces I do, and I'm glad they
I think it
exist.
is good though that even because as a woman, I've run tables that are all guys. And I think in some ways that's also as good as having tables that where you're a female GM or a female player with other women around you, that it's good for some men, especially in-person conventions where some of those people aren't in an online space, to see women in those positions of
Hmm.
game mastering or working at stands. And you know, it's always nice when they come away with a new perspective of women's role in gaming. Um, so yeah, I'd never see it as a bad thing if you have a table with all dudes. It just means you now have a group of people that you can be like, look how awesome women are in gaming and why you should make them feel welcome.
No, my first game at a convention, I played Monster of the Week, and I had the story set in Bolivia, which is where my family's from in South America. And the story was essentially that they are the monster hunters on an agency exchange, and they set them in the middle of the city. And I started yelling Spanish and mixed indigenous languages at them. None of them spoke any Spanish. This is like this is in the Netherlands. I have British, German, and Dutch people at my table, and there's like, and I'm like, no, you're not white saviors. You're in the middle of the place. You're considered weird. No one is trusting you. And there was a literal language barrier at the table. One person took the language communication, so it's like I'm going to whisper things to you, but they were just like, oh, we have to ingratiate ourselves. We have to focus on getting the knowledge and then assume the risk ourselves later. And it was just like I really enjoyed seeing that sort of growth and realization in that one session. And I'm lucky I had a group of really open and cool dudes at my table to go along with it.
I think that's cool because hopefully they think that's cool and then they go away and tell a bunch of their other, guy friends how cool this was.
They told me it was cool, so I'm going to take their word for it, which is all we can do
It
as GMs.
sounds really cool. Like, I want to play.
Next time I'll get you.
Yes.
Next time we'll get you. Before we go, is there anything you want to plug of yourself that is coming along recently? We are here watching this in the month of March.
Yes. There's probably a couple of projects that past Virginia, as recording this, is working on, that present Virginia, as you're watching this, should be shouting
Ooh.
about, that I can't say here because of NDAs. But if you follow me on Twitter, if anyone's still using that, apparently I'm syncing with the ship because I don't like learning new social medias. I will be shouting about on there. Um, and if you happen to be in the UK and you're near Liverpool, we have a Roleplay Haven Liverpool branch opening up, which should be open by now, I think. So you can head down there, or you can search up the Roleplay Haven if you happen to be in Edinburgh, in Cardiff, or in London, where we also have branches. Or if you want to set up a branch and you're somewhere in the UK, email us. But yeah, most of my work I post to Twitter, or at least I retweet lots and be like, I worked on this and it was fun. If you want to catch up with me there, it's pretty much it. I never get time to work on any of my own stuff, so I have none of it to plug. One day.
One day. V, thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for sharing your stories, your perspective, and I hope people watching this come away with seeing themselves in this space, seeing someone awesome, someone with a professional background, someone who seems to be having fun, someone who is actively you know, interacting with the community and with the community, like making things better through Roleplay Haven. So thank you for being. period, full stop. I can't finish that sentence
Thank you for having me on and for being a wonderful host, and it's been great to kind of get to know you as we've been chatting, and thank you for letting me just ramble for ages about things.
The sock puppet story is going to live forever in my heart. It was definitely a key part of this entire talk, and that's all we were here for. Thank you again, and I hope to see you at one of our tables, or we get to work together in the future again.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. Toodles.